Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be talking about a case that takes place in Arizona, which is one of the hottest states I have ever been to in my entire life. Arizona has been known to melt wheels on cars and planes when they're taking off in the dead of summer. So though it has lovely weather in the winter and a lot of older people like to go there, it is tremendously hot otherwise. Specifically, the town that this place is taking place in is Tucson, Arizona. Usually, I build up to the murder, but in this particular case, what I'm going to do is tell you right now. The victim died in a car explosion in 1996. He was at La Paloma Country Club in Tucson, Arizona. I'm going to show pictures here, but eventually it was figured out that there was a pipe bomb placed in a gym bag, and when the victim opened it, it killed him. That victim's name was Gary Triano. Now, he was a wealthy real estate developer in Tucson at the time, and it was said that many people wanted him dead, but who it turned out to actually be was pretty shocking. We're going to go ahead and go through everybody involved in this story, and then we'll eventually get to the point of the whodunit. So I'm going to start off with Pamela Phillips. Now, Pamela Phillips was born in 1957 in Tucson. She's a Tucson native. Now, she wasn't born into wealth, but everybody who knew her growing up always commented she seemed to always care about money, and they all thought that would be her ultimate goal. Like when people described her, they knew she was after money and she was going to find it one way or another. She was a model temporarily because she was a strikingly, beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde-haired woman, but living in Tucson and being a model during that time period, unfortunately wasn't lucrative. But she hustled still and became a real estate agent, and a damn good one, too. She was well known in the real estate community and eventually met Gary Triano, who, like I said before, was a developer at the time. A little bit of background about Gary is he was born in 1943, so he's a little bit older than Pam, and he has a degree in accounting from the University of Arizona. He had his first marriage, and he had 2 kids, and her name was Mary. People described him as very charismatic and as a very good businessman. Anytime he did a development or anybody did business with him, they knew they were going to be successful because Gary just had that track record. They said he also wasn't stingy with his money. He was quite philanthropic and quite generous and helped people when he could. So that's kind of nice to hear. The developers and the real estate agents were having a lot of lavish parties, and Pam and Gary were both known for throwing them, but Pam actually met Gary at a party he was throwing, and they had an instant spark. And eventually, Gary leaves his wife, Mary, to be with Pam. They are married in 1986. They have their first child a year later, and in 1990, they have one more child. During this time, as I said, Gary's really raking in the bucks. Pam stops being a real estate agent and is a stay-at-home mom for the 2 kids, and is overall enjoying her life. People described Pam as a very beautiful woman, but incredibly arrogant, and she wouldn't even speak to you unless you had a certain amount of money. So she had that uppity bitch shit going on, let's be real, which I hate. I hate pretentious people. Hate it. So, yeah, she was that bitch. They had a good couple years together, but sadly for Gary, his businesses started failing left and right, and he started owing money. And it sounded like at some point there was gambling involved. And at that point, with his debts and everything, Pam didn't want to be in the relationship anymore because she always wanted to have money. That was the main thing in her life that sadly meant more to her than anything. So in 1994, she filed for a divorce from Gary because he wasn't making enough dough. Pam is eventually able to get full custody of the 2 children and moves to Aspen, Colorado. Now, I'll tell you right now, I live in Colorado, and I hate Aspen with a burning passion. It is one of the most pretentious, expensive, stupid towns I have ever been, and this just seems to fit Pam perfectly. She moves there with her 2 kids and just leaves Gary in the dust. He even at one time checks into a clinic for clinical depression because he was so upset. That's what was presented. And when he came out, he was completely on his own, sadly. Pam is moved off to Aspen, and there's Gary. This brings us back to the car explosion that killed Gary. The crazy thing was projectiles went all over. So the detectives and everybody around this area at the time had to do a really thorough search, and they were finding car bits on people's roofs. They were finding stuff near the pool. There was just stuff everywhere from this explosion because it was so big. And luckily and unluckily, right, because it killed Gary, there was one other person with minor injuries, but he was the only casualty. Not that that's good. Obviously, he was the murderer, right? But it could have been worse, I guess, is what I'm ultimately trying to say. After Gary's death, the police started to try to figure out who the hell would have a motive for it. Now, the issue with Gary, because he was so wealthy, but also so in debt, he had pissed a lot of people off. He had investors, foreign investors, people from China, people from Russia, and it was insinuated that the mob had a tie-in to him as well. So that there was insinuated that there was possibly gambling involved in there, and that's part of the reason he was there. He also was very aggressive when he did business, so just other people that were in a similar career to him also came up. He owed over $40 million. $40 million. He had over 100 civil lawsuits against him at the time of his death, and he had also filed for bankruptcy in 1994. The police called Pam after this just to talk to her, and at this point she's been established in Aspen, right? She was on the same boat. She said she thought it might have been the mob. It was indirectly referenced, but she also brought up the multiple people that he owed money, the foreign investors, and everybody who knew Gary backed her up. They were like, yeah, that's 100% accurate. She said someone probably took revenge on him for owing money and they were not receiving it. The sad thing about Gary's death is weeks before he passed, his friends said that he was very paranoid and like he thought people were following him, and all the signs of paranoia, he had it, and obviously rightfully so because he was being followed. A strange thing happened. It was in August 1996 that this car explosion happened in Tucson, and in October of 1996, the Tucson police get a phone call from an investigator in Aspen, Colorado. As I stated before, Pam was there. Now, they were searching for somebody who seemed to be unrelated. They were looking for a guy named Ron Young, and they had thought his whereabouts would be coming through there. Now, what he was doing in Aspen is scamming people. So he would say, oh, I can handle your finances for you. He masqueraded, I'm going to say, as a financial advisor to people. He would take their money, and then once he had all the banking information, he would take out credit cards in their name and just dive people's finances into the ground. Because he was a scammer, not really a financial person. They had a warrant out for his arrest because of his scams in Aspen. But the weird thing was, like I said before, Pam Phillips had been established in Aspen for 2 years. And Ron Young had escaped in a van, and they found the van in Yorba Linda, California. And it was really weird because they found a whole bunch of papers in the car, all the papers tied back into Gary. And it had a map of Tucson, a list of Gary's associates, a receipt for a hotel in Tucson that was between Gary's house and the club where the pipe bomb went off. And it was pretty clear to the investigators after they found this van that Ron was stalking Gary. So now this put Ron on the radar hardcore. Because this case at this point is 2 years out and they don't have any leads because there's so many things they have no idea. They can chalk it up to some ideas. But this also ties Pamela back in because Aspen, right? Like she's in Aspen. Now, upon further investigation, it does sound like Pam and Ron knew each other. They were actually neighbors, and Ron was starting to give Pam financial advice. And eventually they started dating, is what people would say. They'd see them spending the night at each other's houses or cuddling by the campfire, just all that. And the thing about Pam, even though she was kind of acting like a socialite at this time, and she was with the uppity up schmuckety schmucks, hanging out at all the cool places in Aspen, she was broke. So she was acting much more wealthy than she actually was. She had restarted being a real estate agent as well. So she was working at, but she had spent so much of the money she got after from selling her share of the house that she owned with Gary, she was down to her last $50K, which still sounds like money, but like I said, Aspen is ridiculously expensive. Like, you should just look at real estate prices there time if you want to feel better about your life. It's fucking stuff. So that's what's going on with Pam time. Now, Ron was missing at this point. They found the van that he had taken to Yorba Linda, but they couldn't find Ron. And they only, now, an interesting thing to note from this is before Gary died, Pam was paid out over $2 million in insurance that was meant for Gary's kids, but Pam was the trustee for the money, and so it went straight to her. Motive. So eventually, between Tucson and Aspen, Ron was featured on America's Most Wanted. Now, at this time, Pam was dating some high-end boyfriend because her ultimate goal is to have money but not work for it. She straight up wants a sugar, and she's in this relationship and thinks she's going to actually the almost fiance, whatever the hell I call him, of Sam, sees this, and they show the tie-ins to her and Ron. And he dumps her like that, like right away. He's gone. And another thing from America's Most Wanted is a chiropractor in Fort Myers, Florida, calls in that number and says, Ron has an appointment with me tomorrow under a... So the authorities go out to Fort Myers. Obviously the chiropractor doesn't tell Ron to cancel his appointment or anything. Pull up and arrest him. He doesn't fight or anything. He goes. He's fairly cooperative, but they now have him. So they raid where Ron was living, and they found floppy disks and micro cassettes, like from a little recording device when technology was harder to deal with. And they also figured out Ron had been getting a few $1,000s in smaller amounts from Pam every couple of weeks for a couple years. They got back. Now, there was tapes of the conversation, and it was clearly free. Now, at this point, there's a clear connection. So the prosecutors go to arrest Pam in her urban home, where she, I should note, had been living the high life and happily off that $2 million she got because of Gary's death. When they pull up to her house, she is gone. And guess where she had fled to? Where all the rich people go when they don't want to get extradited. Switzerland. So she literally goes there, and eventually they're able to deal with Switzerland and come to some sort of agreement. And the agreement includes you cannot press the death penalty if she is to be dead. So in 2014, Pam's finally extradited. It took that long. Gary was killed, and she fled 2 years later, roughly, and was gone for 18 years in Switzerland. And they were finally able to get her out. Now, the insurance is the main thing that the prosecution looked after and were pressing her for first-degree murder because she clearly voted for that. And they said the money that she knew she was going to get is how she hired Ron as a hitman. Now, it should be also noted, Ron was tried for murder and found guilty in 2010 for Gary's death. So his trial is already done. Now, these payments to Ron started after the bomb went off. That's when they started seeing traces of it from her Bank of America account. The cassettes that Ron had kept were used against Pamela in the trial. So he always kind of had suspicions that she may do this. And though they both ended up in jail, it's kind of like he drug her down, which is kind of good in a way because they were bucks for this. Now, the one thing about everything on the tapes is there was no direct admission of what they did. They spoke in code most of the time. The closest thing they got is when Pamela tried to cut off money from Ron. he called and threatened her and said, "You will go to jail for murder." They found that on tape, and that was one of the things that was used against her. But that was the closest thing they said tying them back into the murder. But the prosecution had another card up their sleeve. Was Laura. Now, Laura was a close friend with Pam shortly after her divorce with Gary. And at one point, Pam had an altercation with Gary and called Laura crying. And so Laura came over there to comfort her, just make her better. And she said Pam wasn't scared, but she clearly hated Gary at that point. And something that Laura also said Pam told her is that he'd be so easy to kill. He is such a creature of habit. Someone would just need to kill him when he goes to golf on a Friday afternoon. Which is exactly how Gary was killed. Now, the defense was having absolutely none of this. They said this whole thing was an elaborate con by Ron, and that clearly Pam had nothing to do with it, and that the tapes were saved to merely extort Pamela, but she wasn't admitting to the murder, is what the defense is saying at this point. They also tried to pin it on mob ties because Gary had so many people who did want him dead. They definitely tried to lean on that. Now, the cops did admit that couldn't be ruled out. There was a lot of stuff also pointing to Pam. Now, with Laura, the defense did the best they could to discredit her and said that she had just been hearing stuff on TV and reality and facts from the media just blended, and she just lied about it. At this point, the prosecution and everybody is sitting on the edge of their seats. And if you watch the court footage, which I'll do my best to try and add here, Pam was so confident. She kept looking in the camera and being like, "I'm innocent," and like smiling and making all these creepy faces. She was so confident. It was disturbing. And like I said, I'll add the footage if I got it. So the verdict comes out. Everybody's on the edge of their seats, right? Because we kind of can't have a complete tie-in. But she is found guilty of first-degree murder and is serving life in prison for killing Gary. She maintains her innocence to this day, but is still in jail. So my thoughts on this whole case is Pam can burn in hell. I think it's kick-ass she got caught, and I think it's really, really sad she freaking took Gary for everything he was worth plus his life. So she was still leeching off him even in his death and using her child as human shields for that to get what she wanted. She, in my opinion, is one of the worst humans ever because people mean nothing to her. I think so many of these killers, you see that they value a thing above a human, so they kill. And I feel like that was her whole existence. She wanted to be seen, she wanted to have money, and she wanted to be powerful and important always. And she ran over like a steamroller anybody who got in her way, and used anybody she could to get what she wanted. So I think justice was served, and it was an absolute tragedy that Gary lost his life. Thank you so much for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. Tell me your thoughts below. Was there anything I missed? Do you think she might be innocent? Do you know anything about the case? Were you in Tucson when it happened? Feel free to tell me in the comments below. And like always, thank you so much for watching my videos, and I hope to see you again soon.